We have another excellent speaker for you. Now, I think probably everyone in this audience probably falls into two camps. People that believe magic is real, and people that want to believe that magic is real. But our speaker is not just talking about that, talking about myth. And I'm quite interested in mythology myself. There's a folklorist called Paul Barber who talks about one of the main functions of mythology is that it's useful. And the myth of Britain was a very useful one 300 years ago or 400 years ago to bind the two nations of Scotland and England together. It always being understood that Britain was an ancient nation that crossed the borders of the more modern states of Scotland and England. However, here to tell you much more about what might be a shocking case of cultural appropriation by the English, we have a very learned speaker. He's an advocate, somebody who studied law in this university, but who's long had an interest in some very unusual stories and characters. He's actually interviewed a few people for television on these sorts of subjects of the paranormal. And as he himself said, he never really expected to be so fascinated by the topic he's going to talk about now. But you'll probably understand why when he starts speaking. Would you please welcome your next speaker, Mr. Adam Ardrey, talking about Merlin.
Thank you all very much, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. I was a bit surprised when Alison invited me to speak today, because I thought, why me? Because my Merlin book has got nothing whatsoever to do with the paranormal or the supernatural, and I thought therefore that I'd perhaps been invited on a misunderstanding. What I believe is, yep, can do that. Is that better? Yes. Okay. What I was thinking was that I have a huge respect for the people who believe. I don't always have respect for the beliefs that are held. I'll be quite upfront with you right to begin with. I have no patience or respect for anything that smacks of the supernatural in any guise, be it religion, or mysticism, or psychics, or religion, or crystals, or spiritualism, or religion, or magic, or New Age this, or New Age that. And therefore, I come to you this afternoon from a completely different angle from everyone else. And I thought, how can I do this? I had reservations because I didn't want to cause offence. And you may well be thinking at this point, it's a bit late for that. So I wrote to Alison, and I said to her, are you sure you want me to speak at your conference? Has anyone actually read one of my books? I don't believe in the paranormal, blah, 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 blah. And Alison wrote back to me and said, yes, of course, we still want you to speak. And I thought, now, that's the spirit. That's the spirit that I believe in, the human spirit. And just as a previous speaker was saying, keeping an open mind about things. And so I'm asking you, therefore, to keep an open mind about what I have to say this afternoon. I would like to think it is based on evidence. I say in the book, Finding Arthur, I believe Richard Dawkins is right when he encourages us to always demand evidence. If the evidence I have found stands up and my reasoning is sound, then 10% of British history should be rewritten and the foundation myth of the English-speaking peoples flies off and everything is different. And I stand by that. And what I would like to do is give you some of the evidence and see what you think about it, because that's what it's all about. Evidence to the individuals, people make decisions for themselves. Now, what I've got here is evidence that a man called Merlin was a Scottish druid of the old way, which means effectively druids were like professional people. Some druids would be vets, some would be lawyers, some would be doctors. Women were druids, same as men, and that's one of the biggest differences we have between the way things were back then and the way things are today. Merlin was a druid of the old way, and there is evidence that the legendary Arthur was the historical figure Arthur MacAden. Now, you'll have a sair fecht trying to find yourself another Arthur anywhere else in the United Kingdom that has anything to do with the legendary Arthur. Merlin and Arthur, but you know about them. The one you don't know about, the one that's most important, the real moving spirit in what's called the Age of Arthur, was a woman. And almost no one has heard of her because she was a woman. Her name was Gwyneth. She was known as Languoreth, the Golden One, the Swan-necked Woman, the Lioness of Damnonia, the Queen of Cadso and Strathclyde. That is of here. The Christians who were coming in at that time, because we're talking about the age of St. Mungo, the Christians called her the filthy Lioness of Damnonia. But then they thought that women were, now what was the words they used? Women were hog pools of carnal sewage. And Languoreth was someone that, quite frankly, was not minded to go along with that. So, I'm going to give you some evidence there. So let's just cut to the chase. The one thing that everyone will know about King Arthur is the sword and the stone story. Right, now, what I was saying to you is, I don't believe in magic, I don't believe in the supernatural, I don't believe in the paranormal. How therefore do I believe in a story about a sword and a stone? You know the story. It is that a magic sword was stuck in a magic stone, and what happened was that the rightful king pulled it out and therefore was recognised as being the rightful king. Now, if I believed in that, then I would believe in magic, and I don't. And so what I would ask you to have a look at is the actual evidence. First, we've got here on the left is Donad Hill Fort in Argyll. I don't know if anyone's actually been there, but if you go up to the summit of Donad Hill Fort in Ardrey, you'll see this stone here. Now, what happened was that the people of the Scots at that time, just over from Ireland, maybe for about 60 odd years, their inauguration ceremony involved the Stone of Destiny and also putting your foot into this footprint here. And so what happened was that in 574, Arthur MacAden was inaugurated on the summit of Donad, and what he did was he put his foot into the footprint, was given a sword to hold the same way as the Queen was given a sword to hold at her coronation, and when he stepped out of the footprint, holding the sword, he literally took a sword from a stone. That's the fact, that's what happened, that's what the ceremony was all about. So you have an Arthur. Now, whether you agree with me or not about this being the Arthur, I say to you that what I have there is at least a sensible explanation for the story of the sword and the stone. So you can go to one extreme where you can have a magical sword and a magical stone recognising a rightful monarch, and there is no such thing as a rightful monarch. I mean, there's just a monarch, that's it. Or you can have a sensible enough explanation that at least makes sense. And what happened was that 500 or so years later, people writing about this either did not know about our customs or did not care, and probably it was both, and they magicked it up. Today, you would have CGI, you would have something special done. In those days, they didn't have CGI. So what they did was they took reality and they injected into it some magic. And then you have the magical story of the sword and the stone. What happened then was the litmus test, may as well while I'm just here, the litmus test for the legendary Arthur is the Battle of Badon. There are 4 original sources. Before the thing became legendary and got buried to a great extent under the legends, there are 4 historical sources. 3 of them mention the Battle of Badon, and I'll come in due course to show you what others think of the Battle of Badon. But what I would ask you to remember when I get there is that if you stand on the top of that hill, Donad, you put your foot in the footprint, and you take a sword out of that stone. My son was the first one to do that in 2004, I think it was. And you throw it south, it will land on ground that is to this day still called Badon. It was named after Arthur MacAden's cousin, Bowden. And that's still there to be found in the Ordnance Survey map. Now, if you continue a wee bit further from there, you'll come to a hill fort called Ardrey. Now, that I'll come back to in a minute. I would just ask you to bear that in mind at the present time. So, how come, if I'm right, everyone doesn't know about this? Let me give you an example of why everyone doesn't know about this. Now, this is a book here. It's taken from Phillimore's authoritative book. This is the one that's used in Oxford. It was translated by Professor Winterbottom, and it is the authoritative text. So what you've got on one side is the Latin, and on the other side, the English translation. I think it's the other way around. I think that's the Latin and that's the English translation. But in either event, what you've got at the back of the book is the Latin, and at the front of the book you've got the English translation. And when you look at the actual translations themselves, you will see that, there, I don't know if you can read that, but it says Damnonia. Is that readable from where you are? Yeah? Okay, so that's what the Latin text says. That's what the original text says, Damnonia. Damnonia is Strathclyde, where we are today. That's Damnonia, Strathclyde. It's translated, that's on page, I think, 99. If you go to page 29, you'll see it's translated as Dumnonia. That's not Strathclyde. That's down Cornwall and Devon. And so what you've got there is an authoritative source, and I've been reading other textbooks where they say this happened in Cornwall and Devon, and I think to myself, not if you read the original Latin, it doesn't. And so I got in touch with Oxford University, with the professor that had done the interpretation, translation, and said, how come you translate one word as a completely different word, one place as a completely different place? And the answer was, I cannot remember now. I think it was suggested by Professor Morris, who was the editor of the series of books, who got a lot of money from a lot of sources, because he wouldn't say, I'm going off to dig up some 6th century history, can you give me money for an archaeological dig? He would say, I'm going to dig up Arthur's castle, or I'm going to dig up something to do with Arthur, and people would provide money for digs for that purpose. That's what's been happening over the years. And so what happens is, there's a lot of self-interest involved in this. There are a lot of careers down south where people have invested their whole careers either looking for Arthur, trying to find something that doesn't exist down south, or doing the literature, but it's down south they're all interested in, and they don't want to know up here. And our Scottish historians, they don't want to know either, because they are terrified of appearing parochial. And in any event, to write about Arthur and Merlin as if they were historical characters would just be, well, it makes people's eyes roll. So maybe we have something in common in that connection, because if you are into the supernatural, you are into the paranormal, you will know that people's eyes will roll on certain occasions. I share that, I know what that means. But the bottom line is, it's an identity thing. We're talking here about the foundation myth of the English-speaking peoples. So what happens if it moves from down south to up north? There are a lot of people with a lot invested in that. It's the foundation myth, effectively, of the Western world. Remember, John F. Kennedy's White House was known as Camelot. So who wouldn't like to have a history that includes Arthur and Merlin? Tell you who, Scotland doesn't. Scotland's not in the least interested in that. So the next one we have here is, back to the woman. There are so many different things. I've had to pick and choose the bits and pieces that I would be able to tell you about. I wanted to tell you about Languoreth because people know about Arthur and Merlin. We've never heard of her. You know, if you come from Glasgow, the story of the fish in the ring. This is the fish in the ring. They say it's the bell that never rang, the fish that never swam, etc. But the fish in the ring story on Glasgow's coat of arms is based on an adulterous queen. And the adulterous queen was Languoreth, the golden one, etc., swan-necked woman, what have you. And she, according to the story that's come down to us, written by Christian authors, of course, where Mungo comes out of it, the hero, what's supposed to have happened is that Mungo saved her by pulling a salmon out of the Clyde and cutting it open and finding a ring inside that he gave to her, that she could give to her husband to prove that she hadn't given it to her lover. Now, obviously, that did not happen. I say it didn't happen because people do not pull salmon out of the Clyde, etc. If you believe that, you believe that. I don't believe that. When you read the story really carefully, what you find is that because she was an enemy of Mungo, he was out to get her by accusing her of being an adulteress, which in fact she was, because Languoreth was a human being like the rest of us. She was married to a really great guy called Ardrey the Generous, Ardrey Hale of Strathclyde. Ardrey was gay, but the two of them had done their duty, as royal people are supposed to do. She'd produced 4 children. Ardrey was a good human being. Languoreth was a normal enough human being in that she took a lover. So she was an adulteress. Mungo thought this was his chance, and so he accused her of adultery because she was the worst thing that Mungo could imagine. She was an intelligent, powerful woman, and worse still, she was an intelligent, powerful woman who was unashamedly sexually active, and worse than that, worst of all, she was an intelligent, powerful woman who was unashamedly sexually active and who was not a Christian. And that's what drove him crazy. And so what you have is 12th century sources. Now I know they're a lot later than the 6th century I'm talking about, but there are 12th century sources that say Merlin stood on the crag above St Mungo's Church, that's Glasgow Necropolis. We know that because the next line is, and shouted down across the Mollendinner burn at Mungo in his church below. Now the Mollendinner burn is still there. So you've got 12th century sources that say exactly where a man called Merlin was at a particular time and what he was doing at that particular time. There is no evidence like that anywhere else to do with a Merlin anywhere else. I mean, I've been criticised in the Western Post in Wales. Mr. Ardrey is wrong. Merlin was from Carmarthen because we have a Merlin tree in the middle of the town. And that's the kind of evidence they have. So what you've got here, and this is one of the reasons that I became interested in this. I had no particular interest in Merlin or anything else until I knew that Merlin was active in the southern part of Scotland. Oh, no, this is Merlin meets Mungo. Oh yeah, there was a battle, the Battle of Ardrey, which is the same as my name, which is why I became interested in this, in 573. And what happened then was that Merlin went off into the woods in the southern part of Scotland. The Battle of Ardrey was fought on the River Esk at a fort down there in 573. Merlin was defeated. He was defeated by an army that was led by his own brother-in-law, Ardrey the generous, the husband of Merlin's wife, and it included in that army, in 573, a man called Aidan, who was to become King of Scots the following year. Aidan's young son was a man called Arthur. The battle was fought down at Caer Wendelo on the River Esk, about 2 miles from Arthur's seat, singular, about a mile from Arthur Et. A lot of the place names down there echo this. Arthur's first battle was down there, but it wasn't a battle that Arthur was in charge of. He was too young at that time. Merlin went on the run after that, and 7 years later, in about 580, things had moved on. His sister, who was the Queen of Strathclyde, had worked on her husband, and it was possible for him, Merlin, to come back to Glasgow. Therefore, Mungo came down to Stobo, down in the Scottish borders, and this stained glass window there commemorates the meeting between Kentigern, that's Mungo, and Myrddin, that's Merlin, at that point. The point they met was where the Tweed meets the Postle Burn. Remember, if you or I were to meet, I could say to you, let's meet at such and such services station. We didn't have that in the 6th century, so you met at a place that was easy to find. You find the Tweed, you go down it until you get to the Postle Burn, that's where you meet. And that's them meeting there. Now, Kentigern on the left is always portrayed as a sort of noble hero, and Myrddin on the right is always portrayed as a sort of loser. And if you want to see another stained glass window, you only need to go across the road to Glasgow Chapel, University Chapel, and you'll see almost the equivalent stained glass window of the same event. Myrddin is the name that the Christians gave to him. Myr comes from the same root as Mary and mirth, and it means mad. If anyone's a Gaelic speaker, they will tell you that the word dún means a man. Myrddin means madman. And that's what they called him. Now, this is all the records we have been filtered through a Christian lens for the past 1500 years. Myrddin is what they called him. But after 1066, when the French came across the Norman invasion, Myrddin sounded too much like the French word merde, which means excrement or shit. And they did just what you've done. They thought that was a bit funny. We can't live with that. So it was simply changed from Myrddin to Merlin. And that's how we know him as Merlin to this day. But anyway, there he is. And next to that church, there's a place called Merlindale you can go and visit. And another place called Dramelzir. Now, Dramelzir is said to be where Merlin died. And it is one of the few places where you've actually got an actual distance attached to it. It says Merlin died, and this is in a 12th century record, at a place called Dramelzir, 30 miles from Glasgow. Now, this Stobo, this Dramelzir, is in fact 60 miles from Glasgow. I found another Dramelzir, and if Billy Buchanan's still here, he might well know it. It's just outside Dunnypace, just up the road from where Billy comes from. And there's actually, you can see it in Ordnance Survey maps, it's a place called Dramelzir. Now what happened was, Dunnypace in its day was like the United Nations. That's where people met. It was in the centre of Scotland. You had the Picts up north, you had the Scots off to the west, you had the Britons in the south. They would meet at Dunnypace. And what happened was that Merlin was heading towards Dunnypace, and the records say 2 miles to the west of the hills of Dunnypace, he was set upon and assassinated. And so having found the right Dunnypace, I then looked for other records. Cutting a long story short, in 1838, the workmen who were building the bridge at Denny demolished a beautiful hill, they said. And it was one of these round dome type hills that are the hills of Dunnypace to this day. There were a number of them there. And they said they found on the top of it 5 flagstones, 5 because the lid had obviously been broken by the workmen, And the school teacher and the minister who came there said that within it there were the bones of a man still intact, with the teeth, and no Christian iconography at all, no sword or anything like that a man might be expected to be buried with, but what? A vase with within it, they said, something that looked like a wasp's nest. Writing, in other words. Again, there's a lot more evidence than that about that is the exact spot to within yards of where Merlin was killed according to the records, if you go to the right Dromelsi. So what I then did was I went round all the churches to see if I could find church records that would say to 1 in 6 for burying the bones, etc. Because ministers told me they would never just throw them away. But they said they wouldn't bury them in a Christian graveyard because they were obviously non-Christian bones. And so about a mile or so away, there's a hill fort. And I was out going there to have my lunch. I met the householder, and he said to me that his house had been built in 1574. Would I like to come in, look at some records? Half an hour later, we were up in the hills, and on the hill fort, there is this grave. He said it had always been called the grave. He said when they bought the house about 40 years ago, the old lady who'd lived there all her life said that she'd always known it as just the grave. And what I think happened was that the school teacher and the minister decided, what are we going to do with these bones that we've dug up of what they called an ancient chief? We can't bury them in the Christian graveyard. Why don't we bury them on that fort? I've been trying for 10 years to get an archaeologist involved in actually digging that up and finding out. I did not put it into my first book because I was terrified that someone would desecrate it. Because I thought all I'll need to do is go and see an archaeologist and they'll be interested. They do not want to know. And therefore, there we are to this day. So what we've got then would be, let's just see what we've got next. Oh yeah. If anyone knows what happened to Arthur after he was killed at the Battle of Camlin, he was taken to the Isle of Avalon. Has everyone heard of Avalon? The island set in the Western Sea. Now, you go down south of Carlisle, and look for an island set in the Western Sea. You're not going to find very many of them at all. Ireland maybe, but that's a bit big to be the island that we're talking about. It couldn't be Anglesey, because Anglesey was the headquarters of the Druids. And so what the people down south say, it was Glastonbury. Now, one thing that Glastonbury is not, is an island. It's in the middle of England. We in Scotland, though, if you stand on the Scottish coast, you throw a stone into the water, you can barely miss an island if you throw it far enough. There are islands all the way up and down the western coast of Scotland. But there's a written record that says that Arthur MacAden, family burial plot, not him because he never did become a king, but his uncles and his grandfather, etc., were all buried on the island of Iona. Iona is Avalon. It was an island set in the Western Sea which was special. It was where Arthur was taken to be buried after his death at the Battle of Camlin. Is that just merely a coincidence? I suggest to you that it's not. And not only that, he was buried in a place just next to this little chapel here, which is all Christian now. There's the little chapel there. It's called the Relic Oran. Oran means song. Oranmore, I think you'll know it down the road there, where there's entertainment at lunchtime. But Oran, if you're looking in the old sources and you find someone with a name like Song, you know you're talking about a druid, because they covered it up, and Oran is now a saint. He's a Christian saint, but he wasn't. He was one of Columba, Saint Columba, the dove of the church's first murder victims. He was buried alive, if you read the sources. Of course, if you read the Christian sources, what you'll be told is that he volunteered to be buried alive, because that would help the church stand on Iona. If you read very carefully, and I've done the analysis in the book, Oran was actually sacrificed by the Christians. He was the first one to die there. And you'll find there's his graveyard there, and that's where Arthur was buried, on Iona. Now, the next image is, where are we now? Oh yeah, this one here. I don't know if anyone recognises that. That's the King's Knot underneath Stirling Castle. Now, in 2011, the Herald newspaper had a headline that said, "Find made in search for Camelot for the Round Table." The Round Table was not, of course, a table. What it was a round mound that's underneath that. Geophysics, if you've ever watched Timeline, you'll know about geophysics. Underneath that, there's a round circle, because the way of the Celts at that time was to have a circle. People were more equal. It was the same type of culture that survived until about 1745, when the chiefs of the clans began to go down south and to see themselves more and more as a cut above, a bit aristocratic, above their clansmen. Until that time, the chief might have been the chief, but he wasn't that much better than me. You know, he was still, I could still talk to him. They didn't have a distance between us. In the older times, there was a circle, and people sat in a circle. And what happened was that the best warrior got the best cut of meat, the first cut of meat. But it wasn't as hierarchical as we have today. The question you have to ask is, there are 4 or 5 different sources that say the Round Table. I rode past Linlithgow town to find Arthur at the Round Table in the 12th century. Now, you can't say, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, a poem. How does a poem prove anything? The question you have to ask is, why were all these poems written saying this? Why not some other castle? Why not one down in England? Why Scotland at all? Why is it a place where Arthur MacAden actually lived, where his father lived and where his mother lived, at this particular spot? The reason is that's where the castle, that's where the Round Table actually was. Now, if you look over here, you'll see this thing here. Now, this was knocked down. This is in about 4 or 5 miles from Stirling. It was knocked down in about 1800 to use the bricks for something else. It was a Roman construction. It was called, until it was knocked down, it's still called to this day, Arthur's Oven. Now again, the question you have to ask is, why Arthur? Why there? And why would someone make this up? Why has someone not done this down south in England? You know, why not pick Warwick Castle and have all this stuff there? This is completely counterintuitive. Why Ben Arthur outside on Loch Lomond? Why Arthur's Seat? I know the answers to those things, but maybe we'll get a moment to come to them. But what I wanted to tell you was just how I came to be interested in this. There. Now, the earliest surviving reference to the man called Merlin has it at the Battle of Ardrey in 573. Now, my name's Ardrey, and it just happens to be Ardrey. I emphasise in the book nothing special about me, nothing special about my family, just ordinary, but that happens to be our name. Arthur MacAden, now these are historical facts. The top one comes from the Annals, and the Annal entry, little entries, 573, Merlin, Battle of Ardrey. Historical fact. Arthur MacAden was at Dunardry in 574. I can't say that 100% sure, but his father was there because his father was inaugurated king at that time, and so there's a fair old chance that Arthur was there too. So you've got, and I had 573 and 574. I had an Arthur and I had a Merlin. I had 2 connections with my name, Ardred and Dunardry. And in about 2000, I was going up to Argyll to where our family come from. And as was said a moment ago, I'm an advocate to trade, and so I work in the Advocates Library. But I go through, it used to be a wee secret passage that took me through to the National Library, and I was always using that. And you know how no one gives a damn about anyone else's second name except the people who have it. And so because my name was Ardrey, I looked in books that other people hadn't looked in and found stuff that others hadn't found. And I found a book dated 1768 that had been privately printed in Paris that made sense of these things, these Arthur and Merlin, 574, 573, Ardrey, and it all came together. And as I worked on, I found that other things came together, and the two books were a result of that. What I also found was that in about 600, by this time, Merlin was losing out to Mungo. The reason Mungo's Glasgow's patron saint is because he imposed Christianity upon Glasgow. There was no room for a man like Merlin, who lived at that time about a mile down that way, where the River Kelvin met the River Clyde. Pertnich was the civil capital at that time. Merlin was thrown out of the city. His sister built him a house. 3 bits of evidence say where it was. It was close to what used to be the island in the middle of the river, the White Island of the Druids. And if you know your Pliny, you'll know that Pliny wrote about the Druids dressed in white. The White Island of the Druids, if you walked, it's gone now because they dredged it away to let the ships up. White Inch is why White Inch is called White Inch. It was the White Island, it was in the middle of the river. If you walk up from that, you'll come to, of the 10,000 streets in Glasgow, 10,000, one of them is called Ardrey Street, and it's smack bang where all the evidence says Merlin's house was. And what he was supposed to have was, he was supposed to have built Stonehenge, according to the legends. Now, that is obviously just so much utter rubbish. The truth is, there's other sources that say he had a house with 70 doors. But it wasn't 70 doors. What it was, his sister, according to the 12th century sources, say that she built him effectively an observatory. He had something that looked like Stonehenge, made of wood, and it didn't have 70 doors. It had all the posts and lintels and posts and lintels, and people who didn't understand thought, why has he got a house with 70 doors? And where was it situated? Probably near a stone's throw from here, I think that way, where Glasgow Observatory is today. Because where else would you put it but the single highest point? The observatory is where Merlin's observatory was, because his was an observatory and ours is an observatory. And it's all very, very close to here. And so what we've got there is these coincidences of name led me to Merlin and Arthur and Languoreth. Now, you've got to ask yourself all the time, is that evidence? Is it just a coincidence? Is it a mere coincidence? Does it just happen to be? Has this guy just made this stuff up? You try it. You try finding other people who fit the evidence that we have there. And here's why I think, I've maybe missed a slide. Pressed one too often. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, no. That one's not holding. Yeah, there it is. What we've got there, these are the old maps. So you see my name there, Ardrey. And it's on this one too. This one is, that's Loch Awe up there, sitting on its side. It actually goes up and down. Ardrey is in there. And those are the reasons that I became interested in this. It was simply because of my name that led me to take an interest in this and follow where the evidence led. And I'm still finding the evidence. However, look at the evidence I have here. This here is a map by Professor Alcock of Arthur's 12 battles. If you can see it at all, you'll see there's a Baden, and I think there's another Baden there, and another one there, and another one there, and another one. He's got 6 in total. 6 battles of Baden. Now what happened was that a chap called Nennius wrote a battle list of Arthur. 12 battles. No one has been able to connect 2 of them with an historical Arthur and each other. In other words, Battle 5 and Battle 6, here's the connection, and there's an Arthur attached. No one, I defy anyone, challenge anyone to tell me that they can do that. I can do that with all 12. Alcock, Professor Alcock, I think of Oxford University, has not got all 12 on his battle map list. He's got some of them, Baden I'm taking as an example, he's got that 6 times. I have Baden once, and I got fed up writing to academics and said to one of them once, I'm not as smart as Professor Alcock. He's been able to find 6 Badens, and I can only find 1. And he managed to find his 6 Badens without the assistance of an Arthur or any other evidence. I, on the other hand, was only able to find my 1 because of evidence. My 1 was where I said it was before, remember, at Dunad, within the shadow of a place that makes sense of the Sword of the Stone. It is on the Ordnance Survey maps, none of Alcock's are. Next to it is Dun Ardrey, with the Ardrey connection, where Arthur was in 574, which has a Merlin connection because he was at a place called Ardrey in 573, and my Arthur was buried in Avalon, etc. All the other battles, you'll see my battles then were fought 1 there, 4 there. Why, if there were 12 battles, and folks say, oh, it was a song, it was made up, it wasn't anything genuine. But the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th battles are all called the same thing. Now, any one of us, if we're making up 12 battles, have the wit to imagine 3. Instead of having 4 Douglas battles, you'd be able to think up 3 other names. The fact that 4 of them were called Douglas, and the Douglas land is next to Loch Lomond, in the area of Linnaeus, which is the Lennox, and if you know your land around about there, that's the Lennox. So the first battle was fought there, in the glens of Argyll. The next 4 were fought there, because Arthur was protecting Dalriada, where the Scots were, against the Picts up here. So that was the frontier between the 2 of them, which explains why Ben Arthur is there, right at the eastern end of the Rest and Be Thankful Pass. It's called Ben Arthur because that's where he had his HQ, in there. The next battle was fought over here, where the River Tay and Erne meet. You can look it up, it's called the Battle of Bassus, and you will see each and every one, right, this is the most mysterious battle you can find. No one knows where it is. Bass Church, everything with Bass in it has been put forward as a suggestion. But where the River Tay and the River Erne meet, in 211, a man called Caracalla, who went on to become emperor, built 2 bridges. And if you look beyond Caracalla, you will find his name was Bassianus, and he was known as Bassus. So the Battle of Bassus was fought here, where the bridges of Bassus were. Now, Arthur's headquarters were originally at Stirling, where the Round Table was, before his father staged a coup and took over in Scotland. What happened was, in the Great Angle War that made Arthur's name, the Angles were coming from Berwick up towards Edinburgh. Arthur, smack bang in the middle, had the only force. He effectively held the ring between the Picts, the Scots, the Britons, the Gododin over here. So when the Angles attacked from here up towards Edinburgh, we have to commemorate the event, we have Arthur's seat. Arthur was able to take them in the flank. And the battle there was called the Battle of the Caledonian Wood, because it was not a fixed battle. They were fighting through the woods while the Strathclyde people and the others got together. The next battle was at Gwinion. The next battle is at the city of the Legions, Chester. This is what's suggested, Chester. It's Trimontium. It's 12 miles down the road from Stow, Gwinion. There's lots of evidence about that. It's less obvious than the next battle. The next battle is called Tribruit. There are 42 different sources that tell us about the Battle of Tribruit, but there's one of them called the Vatican Recension, and if you look at that, what you will find, it doesn't call it Tribruit, it calls it Trevroit. It was the Teviot. It was fought at Monteviot, where the Roman road crossed the river, and Arthur effectively pushed the Angles back down to Angle land and made his name. In due course, what happened was the Angles, allied with the Picts, made their way across to here, where there was a battle called Bregunion, according to the legends. It's Berigonium on the Scottish maps, and then 40 miles further south was the Battle of Badon, where Arthur ended the Great Angle War. And if he hadn't done that, there would be no Scotland today. That is when Scotland survived, or at least began. Because what happened down south was the exact opposite. Down south, they didn't have an Arthur. And so what happened was, about 40 years after Arthur died, the Angles eventually captured Edinburgh. The people went down south. The refugees, they went down south. At that time, the Angles were pushing the Britons over to the west, who now become the Welsh, etc., and the Cornish, etc. You're not going to sit round a campfire down there saying, oh, we got a hammering off the Angles up north, I see you're getting a hammering off the Angles down south. No, what they did was, they said, there was a time under Arthur and Merlin when we gave the Angles a kicking. And these stories were obviously more popular, and what happened was, because there was no equivalent Arthur down south, no age of victories down south, they simply adopted it. And so that's why you have an Arthur that exists everywhere in England and nowhere, because he was never there. That's the problem. And so we have lost Arthur because they, down south, have taken him for their own. And if you're not happy with that, then look at, let's see if we've got the next one. Yeah. This is a picture of a Roman fort. It's the legendary Arthur supposed to have died at a place called Camlan. It's Camelin in Falkirk. Now, think about Falkirk, just south of Stirling, where the Round Table was, next to Arthur's Own, 6 miles or so from where Merlin was killed. All this is going on there now. This fort is at Camelin. Why is Camelin called Camelin? Because the people from Falkirk speak funny, that's why they speak Camelin, whereas it's actually Camlin. And in the legends, it's Camlin. And they say it's Cadbury in England. It's not. Cam means twisted. Campbell means twisted mouth. Cam means twisted. Land comes from the same root as land. Camlin was twisted land. This stuff here at the front were massive ditches built by the Romans. They were still there in the 18th century. And so they were much more evident in Arthur's time, about 400 years after the Romans left. So what happened is that the battle was fought here on the twisted ground, and Arthur was defeated and killed. And I found this out, not because I was looking for this fort, I was looking for a fort that's up here, and this is now the practice area of Falkirk Golf Course, because they're not allowed to dig bunkers, etc., because it's a Roman fort. But there's a golf tee there, the 9th tee, and that was a place called Aidan's Fort. Arthur's father was Aidan. And so not only have I got a Camlan and an Arthur, I've actually got his dad's name up in the top left-hand corner and an explanation for why it's called Camlan there. Arthur's Seat, of course, is called Arthur's Seat because Arthur, as I was explaining earlier, won the battles there that saved Edinburgh from the Angles, at least for a time. And let me just see what else I've got here for you.
Just a few more minutes.
All right, well in that case I'll stop and just say to you, if anyone's got a quick question, ask any question you want, and I'll do my best to just answer any quick questions anyone has got. I handed out earlier a large list of questions because I knew I wouldn't get to everything. Remember I said to you at the beginning about evidence? Look at that list there. That is not a comprehensive list. I could do another page like that. And about 2 weeks ago, I got a letter from another academic in Scotland, and he said, "Oh no, I prefer Arthur of Diffid. I've looked for Arthur of Diffid. I can find about 3 lines, nothing to do with a legend."